It used to be that visits to the council were few and far between. This was the third time in a week? Some people would probably love the chance to network with the elite of an organization, but it worked rather differently for the patrol. This is simply unacceptable. How is this possibly my fault? I've been doing everything I possibly can to combat crime in this city for a year now. For any police organization, it seemed like the only time a detective was brought before the command structure was to get chewed out. You had passed through the checkpoint just moments before the explosion. You're the Shade. You're supposed to stop things like this. Council Chair Mariva was the one doing the chewing today. Despite what you might think, I'm not magic, Vincent insisted. Everyone was in line. No one seemed to be making any fuss. It's not like I can read their minds. No one was holding a sign that said, I'm about to blow up. The fuck do you want me to do? The Urvesh growled out. You're supposed to be stopping this at the source. You're the one with the supposedly legendary criminal sense. Now we've had to triple security at the checkpoint, and we've got nearly every organization based in Sector 1 clamoring for answers on top of a general panic. That's quite enough, Council Chair Mariva, Kuyina said as she gave the other Urvesh a look. The male glanced her way for a moment, before leaning back in his seat, upset, but quiet. The political discussion isn't important to your job. Is there anything you saw before the explosion? Why are you asking me? Just check the security footage, Vincent suggested, knowing full well there wasn't any. We don't have any recorded footage of the checkpoint. For political reasons, we're not allowed to record people entering and leaving the various lifts to Sector 1. Kuyina really was a far call from Latero. From most Urvesh, in fact. In the past, even small details like that would have been kept from him for some reason. He certainly enjoyed the newfound trust. Or perhaps just a more open-minded boss. Well, there was a courier with a package. That's all I can remember that stood out. Do you have any analysis of the explosive or the blast point? It appears to have been nothing more than commercial-grade simplex. Vincent shook his head a little. It had amazed him that they simply sold a low-grade explosive in modular pyramid shapes that could be formed into purpose-built shapes. Then again, the city had no history of domestic terrorism, and only unorganized crime until recently. There were requirements to buying it, but the commercial licenses that companies held lacked in-depth security measures. No shrapnel or fragmentation material? No. Kuyina shook her head. Then they're not familiar with military explosives or IEDs. The council stared at him for a moment until Mariva spoke up. IEDs? And what do you mean about military explosives? Door and wall charges don't have a bearing on this discussion. Oh, right. I forget that the Union doesn't have much of a history with explosives. My people do. All over the place. From the weapons we use, which are nothing more than controlled explosives, to bombs that release gas and then spark it to make a massive explosion. Our military uses these things called grenades. They're basically a shaped charge surrounded by metal designed to fragment into as many small pieces as possible to hit everyone around them. IEDs. Improvised explosive device. Similar things but made by hand on the fly by insurgents, or just forces without steady industrial support. The council was staring at him with a mixture of surprise and disgust, it seemed. They just toss explosives around, but there's no provision for collateral damage. Without targeted fire, they might horribly wound several people without killing any. That sort of suffering is pointless. Vincent held up his hands. They just make explosives on the go? Without proper equipment? That's insane! Vincent waved his hands to try and avert further outbursts from the various council chairs. Hey, whoa! I'm just the messenger here. We've had a history of serious armed conflict between nations. Bullets like I fire from my magnum takes chunks of flesh out of targets. That means months or years of recovery, and at times you'll never fully recover. I know the energy weapons you've got only take a month or two to recover from. unless they kill you. The idea for my people was, if you're in the hospital recovering, you're not on the battlefield fighting. For every person you injure, you tie up resources and personnel to aid them instead of fight.
An interesting notion,
Mariva said as he rubbed his chin. Vincent had noticed that he was one of the only council chairs who didn't look revolted, Kuina being the other one, and she spoke next.
Rather fascinating indeed. I suppose the nature of your conflicts shape the tactics. Since the Union only has to fight the worms and their fleet, we have a different need for our energy weapons. Quick recovery is beneficial. However, back to the discussion at hand. The preacher needs to be found and dealt with. We're prepared to begin a massive series of sweeps through the lower sectors, but we need some sort of plan or a focus point to begin.
I don't think he's down there, Vincent said, which made the various Yervesh look a little surprised.
Of course he's down there. He's a loudmouth felon promoting an extremely treasonous series of attacks against patrol,
Mariva countered.
Where else would he find sanctuary but with those degenerates and scum?
He's much too well funded for this to be a simple operation. Plus, he strikes me as a personality. Vincent tried to search for a better word. In his own mind, he's a celebrity. You can hear it in his broadcast. I think he'd demand to live somewhere luxurious. I think he's above Sector 10. The council shifted uneasily at the thought. They'd always promised their citizens that crime above Sector 30 purely revolved around tempers and passions. Kuina, however, looked entirely unfazed.
This is why I give you control of the search. We'll wait for your input before starting the sweep.
Did you find out anything from the recording of the surgeon and those hostages?
We have specialists trying to analyze what they're talking about. Something regarding a time delay toxin,
Kuina answered. Overall, Vincent could really get used to being treated like an equal. Or at least, not like a barely trained animal. Have that mouse scientist I rescued listen to it. He may know more, Vincent suggested, but got some blank stares for a moment.
Mouse scientist?
One ventured, until he saw Kuina light up.
The Novarist. Short, furry, tail, big eyes, round ears?
She asked. Yeah. Vincent nodded.
That's an excellent idea. With all the activity involved in becoming Supreme Council Chair and the woes of the city, it had slipped my mind.
Kuina nodded.
Other than that, I think we're done here. Any further questions?
Mariva spoke up.
I'd like funding to pursue creation of these grenades the Shade mentioned. What?
This did not seem to surprise Kuina.
I just discussed why we don't have a need for weapons like that. Why are you seeking to proceed with a project in that vein? We're approaching this conflict with the felons in the wrong way. If they're recovering for months or years, then they aren't attacking patrol. Can you imagine how much damage a device like that could cause on a crowd of unarmored civilians?
He seemed downright gleeful at the thought.
Yes, I can. Which is precisely why I must disagree with any course of action that will see us use such weapons against our own citizens,
Kuina stressed.
Think of the force multiplier this gives our patrols,
Mariva continued, sounding a bit like a kid presented with the task of arguing why his parents should buy him a particular toy.
Being vastly outnumbered has long been an issue with any patrols heading deep into the lower sectors. The only real explosives we use is woven into the combat harnesses. What if we started using explosives more regularly? That would surely drive fear into the hearts of those anarchists.
Vincent snorted. What's next? Leading patrols with flamethrowers? They stared at him until Mariva spoke.
Wait! A device that throws flames? That's marvelous! Think of the potential. Of burning citizens alive, not to mention the fire danger to the city. Absolutely not!
Kuina actually seemed aggravated now.
Perhaps you're right. I'll settle for funding the grenade project and see how that works. No.
Kuina virtually growled.
That's not your decision. This is a funding project clearly related to my field, and as such you can't simply overrule it. We vote. All opposed?
Kuina and two others raised their hands.
All in favor?
The majority then raised their hands, Mariva included.
I'll assign a fabrication team to the project immediately.
Kuina fumed, but remained silent as the Urvesh rose from their seats to leave. Vincent turned as well, but Kuina called out.
Creature 88, if you would follow me, I have something private to discuss.
He looked back, surprised, and noticed the other Urvesh seemed a bit surprised as well. Hopefully it was just a private lecture about no more discussions regarding human weaponry. Those were suddenly more dangerous than he'd figured they ever would be. He followed her out of the back of the chamber, finding a small hall leading to a set of private offices and a lift. She waved him into the private office, which looked to be in the middle of a remodel. There were boxes on the ground, and some new things being hung up on the walls. Paintings, some sort of diploma, pictures. The desk was a steel slab set on what looked like carved marble legs, and was perfectly clean. It seemed she hadn't finished moving out Latero's things, but he wasn't sure what belonged to whom. Then he noticed the chair in the corner. Is that a sync device?
Yes, a private line that doesn't go to general analysis. I'd like you to sync. I want to review the meeting in more detail, and I need you to sync before we go to my estate in case the computer encrypts your memories again.
What? More words processed in his head. Wait, what?
Oh, that's right. The others didn't want me to tell you. Well, they aren't here now. When you entered Latero's former estate, my current estate, the computer encrypted your memories. I wanted to see if that happens again. Plus, you mentioned before a desire to speak with the special prisoners once more. And on top of all of that, I feel it might be a good idea for the two of us to build a rapport. As the Supreme Council Chair and Shade, the two of us could accomplish a great many things to help the city.
Vincent honestly wasn't sure what to say. It made him think on Mock's distrust of her, and her apparently mysterious past. The Wardens still had someone in the Urvesh command structure. He needed to be careful. That makes sense. I appreciate the trust you've been showing me since you took over for Latero. He sat back on the chair, feeling the pinch in his neck as he connected the device. He only had about 2 hours to sync, and sped through it in just a few minutes. Once done, he pulled the device free and stood, following after the Urvesh as she motioned to the door. The lift took them to the roof of the patrol HQ, and there was an all-white craft waiting for them. He was used to the open-sided patrol craft and their very basic design, but this was clearly something different. There were doors on the side, and it had a sleeker, luxury style to it. He went first, opening the door for her, and then looking in on the red interior. Very posh indeed. She boarded and took a seat, motioning for him to take the seat across from her. The door slid shut easily behind him as he sat down and fastened the harness. He couldn't even hear the engines, just a very faint, gentle hum.
It should be noted, Creature 88, that I come from a very different background from Latero. I'm much more interested in advancing our procedures and methods to better serve the Union. He, and in fact almost all those with military background, has a much more closed mindset. They also regard you by your relation to children's stories and myths. I have no such aversion.
Vincent nodded. So I've noticed. Why is that?
Our people breed based on a variety of favorable traits. It's not a formal eugenics program, but more a personal taste in desirable partners. My parents were selected as part of a small program to try and purposefully breed someone from a military hardliner and one of the top general habitat of strategic thinking officials. Basically, one of the most disciplined of our kind, and one of the most free-spirited of our kind. I'm the result.
Vincent arched his eyebrows in surprise. He hadn't been expecting such a direct answer before she continued.
I've tested highly on every mental and intellectual test our species has, and despite appearances to the contrary, I also score very highly on physical tests as well. I'd say I'm a complete success. Most would agree, seeing as I've become Supreme Council Chair so quickly.
How have you managed that anyway? Until meeting you, I had no idea your Vesh even considered doing things that aren't protocol.
When you've got the intellect to know what must be done, and the willpower to see it through no matter what, anything can be accomplished.
She smiled at him, but really that just unnerved him. He wasn't used to your Vesh giving him rhetorical non-answers, but she'd been obviously and clearly opposed to making grenades to use on the general populace. He couldn't tell if she was hiding something or not. Where'd you get the craft?
Oh, this is the same model used by the Bureau for Advanced Theoretical Projects. I find it far more comfortable than the standard variant.
Vincent nodded, considering she was entirely correct. Perhaps the more scientifically minded Yervesh had the right idea. Pity he never dealt with them. Soon they were landing at her estate. It looked like there were more weapons up on the walls compared with last time. He opened the hatch and helped her step down, though he suspected she didn't need it. She smiled, however, and he noticed the smooth coolness of her fingers as she took his hand. As they walked towards the estate, the craft began to lift off, and he looked back in surprise. It's not waiting around.
It's not very efficient to have a craft dedicated just to one person, even if it's the Supreme Council Chair. It'll return after completing some other runs. Why? Planning on making a quick escape?
She asked and glanced over at him. No, he said, but suddenly felt uneasy. Was this where she'd ambush him? Knife in the back? Turn the defenses on him? Was her friendly nature an attempt to get him to lower his guard? Wait, he was a fucking clone! He relaxed a little. He'd be a terrible spy. All he had to go on regarding Kuina perhaps being an enemy was Mock's lack of knowledge about her background. It didn't mean she was actually hostile in any way. The doors opened easily for them, and inside it looked just the same as last time. He didn't see any signs of redecorating the steel and wood halls. Didn't want to change up the estate like his office? He asked.
Oh no, Letero had superb taste, quite surprising considering his nature, but I've been very impressed with his skills at home decor. What's so funny?
Vincent had begun to laugh as she looked confused. I was actually wondering about that when I first came here. This place looks very nice. I had thought he had some sort of designer, however. To think of him angrily picking out materials for the construction, or yelling at a worker because they had planted some flowers wrong, makes me laugh. As he explained that, Kuina actually laughed as well and smiled, brushing his arm with her hand.
You're right. That is a rather amusing thought. Perhaps he'd call up the paint manufactory and demand to know why they named paint, and why they picked the names they did,
she added, and Vincent actually pictured that before laughing at the thought as well. Hold on. Did you just make a joke? He arched a brow at her as they walked into the large open room he'd seen before. The bar looked just as well stocked as before, and she'd left up the paintings he liked.
Yes? Is that not all right?
She asked, seeming a little amused. No, it's just... I can't remember the last time any Yervesh told a joke. He chuckled and shrugged.
Well, Creature 88, our scientific community is much more boisterous than our military, let me assure you.
She smiled at him, and he smiled back. Hopefully Mock was just paranoid, because he found himself liking Kuina. Certainly good to finally have a boss who was so friendly. Please, call me Vincent.
Vincent?
She nodded.
While in private, you should feel free to call me Vera.
He blinked, just realizing that Kuina might not be her first name. He had a horrible time remembering Yervesh name systems. They used the names given constantly. Did they also had private names? Vera, he said after a moment. Just in private? I'm guessing it's sort of a personal name. Well, of course it's personal. You know what I mean. He felt a little flustered as she laughed.
Yes, I understand what you mean.
She waved at the bar then.
Would you like a drink?
Didn't you want my help with something? And I should probably speak to the criminals in the prison section before I go drinking.
Oh, yes, of course. There's a door at the back. I can't find on any previous plans for the estate. The computer says it's only accessible to those with proper authority, which apparently doesn't include me. I was hoping you still had access and could see what's in there.
She began walking him towards the prison, as he suddenly got worried. He was the one who locked everyone else out. Well, I can give it a shot. I think you're overestimating how much Latero trusted me, though.
Nonsense. He may have called you the Shade and constantly monitored your progress, but I assure you he spoke highly of your value and trusted you more than anyone else, myself included.
They were in front of the extra secure door to the prison system, and Vincent was trying to think of a way out of this. Computer, open prison access.
Permission denied. Until security level changes, no more than one person can access the prison at any time. Right. Looks like I've been exceptionally forgetful lately.
Kuyina, Vera said, with a laugh.
Well, you go talk to them. I'll wait back in the main lounge.
She smiled and nodded, giving his shoulder a gentle stroke for some reason, before walking back down the hall. Now alone, Vincent spoke up. Let me in. The door opened and he slipped through very quickly before having it shut behind him. He dodged a bullet there, to be sure. It seemed a little odd that she wouldn't know about the security feature, however. He then glanced all around the airlock-like entrance for some sort of trap. Fucking with my head, he muttered, realizing he was now snapping between thinking of Vera as a potential good friend and an enemy agent trying to attack him. It would help if he could just settle on one, but that was proving difficult. Either way, nothing stabbed, shot, or exploded him, so he proceeded past the next secure door and the various mounted blasters into the prison itself. As he walked down the center, he saw Balder standing near the field blocking off his cell. Pyrrha was stuck to the ceiling for some reason.
Did you bring the chocolate and alcohol?
No, I was brought here when I wasn't expecting it. Next time, I swear. He heard the blob gurgle and slide around the ceiling of the cell, which he could only assume meant annoyance. He nodded at Balder, who nodded back, and then continued down past the frog dog thing and the metal cube to get to the cell with the vulture art thief. Cavern?
Cavus,
the Xeno corrected as he turned around. Vincent really thought his first instinct to call him a vulture man was spot on. Vincent pulled the writing pack he'd gotten from the Ermani out of his jacket. He'd been holding on to it since he got it, and was glad he hadn't destroyed or misplaced it this entire time. He saw a spot on the cell he could place the packet, and pressed a button so the opening closed and opened inside the cell.
What's that?
The Xeno asked, obviously confused as he picked it up. I wasn't allowed to bring you electronics. A lie, but he didn't trust the thief yet. That's paper and some pencils. You use the black bit to write on the paper. That little rubber bit on top is an eraser.
Yes, I'm familiar with the concept.
The Xeno's voice was practically dripping sarcasm.
You want me to write out the instructions to get into my stash? On paper that I can't encrypt?
Yes. Vincent nodded. What does it matter anyway? If you thought I'd turn over your stash, it's just as likely if you encrypted it or not.
It's also something a person could casually stumble across.
I'll eat it if they do. Vincent shrugged.
I suppose that makes sense. You've been hanging around a lot of your vesh.
The vulture nodded. What does that have to do with anything? Vincent asked, obviously confused. You don't know why they like writing things out, or have so many physical copies, and so they can redact information or destroy it easily. The Guardians of the Union have no desire to let the general public know a great many things. There are historical documents in museums that have redacted portions on them. Some of my first big forgeries were of your Vesh documents. They just love private correspondence between historical figures, and if it's mostly black bars, they get positively giddy. Fascinating, Vincent muttered, and thought back on Mock's comment about Kuina having a heavily redacted file.
What are you giving him?
Pyrrha suddenly asked from down the way. Some paper and pencils, Vincent called back down.
I want some!
Why?
For my poetry, or I'll tell on you!
Vincent rolled his eyes. Was the criminal mastermind a damn child? Without even being told, Cavus put a sheet of paper and a pencil back into the little opening, which was soon rotated back to Vincent. He took the paper and pencil down, repeating the process to give it to Pyrrha. The blob dropped from the ceiling and moved over to pick up the single sheet of paper and a pencil.
Just one?
I don't have much.
But my poems are epics and lengthy.
Then consider this a challenge. Plan out your words carefully and only write them when you're totally sure. The blob sank into a puddle for a moment, before rising back up.
I accept!
Then it slid across the floor into a corner, and he shrugged. You still sane in there, Balder? He asked the other Zeno, who shrugged.
Sane enough.
He flicked his fangs out for a moment, before his scales rippled a little as he stretched.
I'd love to go for a walk around town someday, though.
If I need to kill a dragon, I'll be sure to bring you along, Vincent promised, and walked back down to the vulture. You all set, then? The Zeno was looking at the two pencils he had, and then nodded slowly.
I no longer want the painting.
No?
No, not yet. I'd like some paint supplies.
You're a famous art thief and forger. What could you possibly have rolling around that skull of yours that makes you think the council will let me give you paint supplies? The Zeno looked back to Vincent, as if that was the first time he even considered the thought.
Ah, yes. Then I shall write you directions to my stash after all. But also bring more paper and pencils.
Fine, Vincent said, and waved his hand dismissively. He walked to the chamber at the back, punching 8 on the keypad until the door opened, and stepped inside and shut the door behind him. Once in the chair, he felt a pinch in his neck from the sync device. It was a bit more painful than back in Vera's office, since he'd just done it. His spine didn't like having a giant needle jammed into it. Editing controls.
Passcode required.
Catherine.
Passcode accepted.
Encrypt session since most recent sync until next sync. As he watched the screen give him a small progress bar, he realized something. Vera, Kuina, whatever. She wanted him to encrypt his memories. She had to. She said she wanted to test it, but then immediately acted friendly and told him her private name. She wouldn't do that if the text could find out. Would she? And he'd just incriminated the shit out of himself by talking to the prisoners, so he couldn't let anyone see those memories either. Oh, shit, he muttered softly. What did she have planned? Were the memories encrypted because a warden team was about to show up? Poison food? Torture? Fuck. He stared at the complete message on the screen for several seconds, before finally pulling the needle out of his neck. He stood up and pulled his magnum free, loaded it, and then holstered it once more. If he was going back up there, he was going to do it armed and ready. One way or another, he was probably about to find out if Kuina was the traitor.